Hello, and welcome to the IPython Dev Meeting on this Thursday, May the 8th. It's a bike to work day, so welcome. We have a lot of things to cover today.
Yeah, we got a slightly reduced roster today.
And we're short on numbers, so we need your help.
Okay.
Done.
Yeah, thanks. So first thing, which I'm not sure how much we can do about it right now, but the John has a PR to remove some Flexbox from the input cell, which at this point fixes a bunch of bugs. Hello, other person.
Hi.
Hello. Do any of us know you? I'm sorry, I don't object to you being here, I just don't know who you are.
Sorry. You know my husband, Kyle.
Oh, hi.
Okay, hi.
Okay.
Hi.
Welcome. Good to meet you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, so the Flexbox thing, it removes Flexbox from input cells, which fixes various scrolling things with mostly on Firefox. But I've looked at the PR and it introduces some new things, so it needs a bit of help to get merged. But since John's not here, it'll probably be a little while before we can do that. So I think what that means is, since it is important, that we're probably going to hold 2.1 for another week or two until we can figure this out.
And please, if you're watching, try the PR, merge it locally, and use it.
Check out the PR and see what new wonky things it might introduce, so that we can figure it out and get it merged. Yeah, that's just that.
That's really all we can do without John.
Yeah, without John here.
Do we know how long they're in Mississippi?
I think it's just this week, so they'll be going back like tomorrow or this weekend.
Okay.
Message spec changes, I think, are pretty much done. They've had a bit of review from Thomas and Matthias. I guess there's 2 PRs there now. There's 1 PR for the changes and 1 PR for the adapter.
And we are early in dev. I suppose we can break things and fix it later.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, if merging both of those PRs on preliminary testing of the Julia and the R kernel, it doesn't break anything. Obviously, that's not going to turn out to be the case. So I would rather get it merged sooner than later. You know, if people want to do a review and stuff. So I'd be inclined to merge that today or tomorrow.
Okay, I'll do a quick review pass on the adapter.
Right. Yeah, that's
so
when
we can hopefully get them merged like in quick succession.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll hold the message spec PR until maybe the end of tomorrow, depending on the adapter discussion, because then we might merge them both at the same time and have only a minute of breakage.
And if there's going to be somebody who pulls in that minute,
Yeah.
if because the message spec changes will touch quite a lot of stuff, if there are any PRs that people want to make and want to be backported to 2.x, then it will be easier to backport them if you make those PRs before that gets merged.
Yeah, otherwise there'll be a little bit of rebasing, and backporting will be a little bit more tedious. But
so just a heads up, if there's anything you're aware of that you want to be backported.
Matthias, you had a note about interact heuristics?
During PyCon, doing some stuff with interact, I felt weird that we had underscore in variables. And so Jess made a PR that was replacing underscore by space when you do like high-level at interact. And so we don't agree whether or not it's a good thing or not. I understand Brian's points that it's API and it shouldn't maybe break what we already have. But I feel like we might want to have something which is slightly higher level that do some smart things, because like the way I see interact is a quick way to get most work done for the user.
Mm-hmm.
Like we already have heuristic when we use tuples to detect whether or not we want a flow slider or an in slider, and I don't see why we wouldn't have the same for variable names. Like obviously, if you use a variable name named sigma, for example, you might say, yeah, it will render as directly the LaTeX stuff. So do we want to investigate like the low-level API, the higher-level decorators that directly do more stuff on the naming and the layouts of widgets?
So my take, which I've put in the PR, is that the interact that we ship should keep the connection between the widgets and the function parameters simple and obvious. You know, the name is the same name as the parameter, and I think there's quite a bit that you could like build. There's quite a bit of extension you could do to interact if you want to make like a more user-facing interactivity mechanism, like, you know, controlling the order of the sliders or the widgets and names. You might want to give them labels that are completely different from the parameter names, and I think it would be appropriate to build a separate tool to do that. I think it probably doesn't need to be part of IPython. I would just make a separate module for like user-facing interact.
One thing I do see is so the use case, or if you want something like the LaTeX Sigma, the way I would initially suggest you do that is, you know, anything that the abbreviations don't support, you can do by instantiating the widget itself. Right, so interact A equals some widget, and then you do description equals something. When I look at the code that this patches, I think we unconditionally set the description of the variable name.
Yeah,
so at the
I
very
agree,
least, we should do that if the description is empty, rather than always.
Yes, that makes sense.
And that would at least allow you to have whatever labels you want.
Yes. Yeah, but I think that for the average user that will never dive in interact or find how to do its custom layout of widgets, it's nice to have just a high-level decorators that will do most heuristics. Because the thing you say about like, yeah, but if you want a special variable naming, then you create the slider or the widget yourself. It's the same that for the abbreviation and the tuple. We already do heuristics, so why do we do heuristics on the type of sliders and not the name of variables?
Well, for one, because we have to do it on the type of sliders, and we don't have to do it on the variable name. I mean, I see your point, but like it's not optional on the.
Yeah, you could always tell to people you have to pass explicitly the type of widget you want.
Well, that's true. Yeah, no, I see your point.
I mean, so I do think that, like, I mean, if you want to do all of creating all of the widgets yourself, it seems like there's a fairly like large gap between like using interact and then like creating them all yourself. And so
you can use interact, and instead of an abbreviation, you can use an actual widget. So you just do decorator interact A equals int slider widget, and then you can customize the int slider.
Yeah, but it's a huge gap for the average user to go from just using interact to use a full widget.
I don't think that's a huge gap at all. I mean, if you have to actually refactor your function to like add the widget and add a callback, it is. But just passing a widget object into your interact call, I think, is
right, because it is
small jump.
It is definitely out of scope to extend the widget abbreviations to support everything you can do with the widget. Like right now, you can't set you can't do an int slider where you set the value.
Yes.
right? You can set the range, but then it puts the slider in the middle. So if you want to put the slider at the beginning, you have to instantiate an int slider. And I think that's...
I think you can actually do that one. I think if you set the default
value on the function.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you control both the function you're decorating and the interact call, then you can. Yeah, it's always going to be things you can do with the interact controls that you can't do with an abbreviation. You can still do with interact, but you can't do with a tuple abbreviation of a widget.
Yeah.
So how would you propose you express the abbreviation so this is just doing something by default, but how would you propose actually expressing this is what the description should be in interact?
In interact, I don't think you can directly do it, but I would change the default way of always trying to, like, if you really want the variable name to get the underscore, then you have to create the float slider yourself and give the description, which is the raw description.
I would think you would want it the other way around. That having actual variable names is less surprising than...
Most of the time you don't... The variable name you will use are not even the variable name of the function signature, but the variable name of your code.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't see... I mean, it's still weird. When I name...
the time, the function that you're interacting with is your code. Because, I mean, trying to call interact on a plot function, a matplotlib.plot function or something is not really useful.
Yeah, but if I have a function which I created for which variable names are called, I don't know, lambda underscore 0, I would expect to see a lambda 0 because like interact is already.
Yeah, but there's no way we're gonna be able to guess lots of variable names, right?
Yeah, to this extent I understand, but like most of the time when you use underscore in variable's name, it's just like because you want space and you cannot use space.
It seems very simple and consistent to say this is exactly the variable name unless you tell it to be something else, rather than this is the variable name but with a bit of fudging to try and make it readable but not very much.
Yeah, I don't know. And in...
Is there a reason why like the widget description is set unconditionally?
I think that's just an oversight, right? Because it's based on I think it was just written with the assumption that people are only using abbreviations, so there's no way that they would have set the description.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, if they passed a real widget, then they could have.
Yeah, I think that change is something I don't think anybody would argue with. But
yeah, I definitely don't think that interact should set the description if there already is a description. I think overriding description is definitely wrong.
So maybe we could at least just like make that change and then see
absolutely.
how that works. And then, I mean, if it seems like people really want something more high level, then maybe like we can revisit the issue. But and that would at least get rid of the case that I was like I wanted to have a custom description and couldn't easily do it because of that reason.
Yeah. I think enabling custom descriptions is important.
Yeah.
And I think so the unconditional collaborating of description is definitely wrong. I think it is harder to say what the right thing to do is.
From the point that I think if somebody wants to make a PR fixing that, I think that would probably be fine to backport to 2.1.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I can do that.
Okay, great. Thomas, you have a note about the comms-only kernel?
So this is, we were talking to Raymond Yee's class the other day who've been doing these little data analysis projects on various different things, and one of the things that's starting to come up quite a bit with the widgets is that people build a nice interactive visualization of something, and then want to be able to display that and let people interact with that on a public website without, obviously they don't want to hand the whole internet the keys to their server. So I was thinking, would it make sense to have some kind of, I called it commsonly kernel, in that it would only respond to the comm messages, not to any execute request or completion request or anything. So all you could do is hook up some widgets to it, and that would also we'd probably leave it up to the application developer to ensure that there was no global state, so everybody who moved the widget would get a new
either a new instance of the widget or even a new kernel process.
Well, I was thinking we'd just leave it up to them to deal with that, at least for the moment.
Yeah. I think that speaks to, so you wanted to clean up the kernel class so that you've got something with just kind of no-op message handlers, so that it's easier to build the sub-process kernels, the simple kernels.
Yeah.
I think
White back easier.
Yeah, because with that, then really all you want to add, or all we would want to add, is the notion of black and white listing message types. Right, so you just take the kernel and you just say, right now you can do it. You just take the existing code we have and then replace the register a bunch of message handlers with register one handler. But I think that right now would be a big copy-paste subclass. But I think after you do that, it should be fairly straightforward to add the notion of implementing, having a kernel that only provides a subset of the messages.
Cool. Okay, I will keep that in mind as I'm refactoring then.
And this sounds like related to the static widget discussion that we had a few weeks ago.
Yes, it is, though it's
because the use case, but the use case that you have is effectively the static widget use case, right?
Yeah, this is kind of the next step up, where for whatever reason, if it's not practical to save every possible state of your widgets, if you've got 10 sliders or something.
Oh, I see. So this is there still is a kernel. It's just that it's only accepting comm messages and is doing things based on those. But
you need to be extremely careful with that in terms of what you do with the. I guess comm messages aren't that sketchy.
Well, it depends on who's on the other side, what's done based on those comments. You could have a comm message.
The person who cares controls that.
Right. That's what. Well,
right, and you can't create arbitrary objects with comm messages. You can only open comms with already registered types. So if you've already defined all your Python comm types, or even better yet, you're actually instantiating them on the Python side, and you have none registered on the Python side that can be created from the JavaScript side, you have pretty good control over what they're actually allowed to do. I think that's a useful project worth exploring, and I would definitely do it after the kind of base kernel thing.
Yeah, which in turn is after the message spec changes.
Yeah.
Step by step, we'll get there.
The serialization
you gotta line up your ducks in a row.
Right.
Almost as though we want some sort of like DAG-based scheduling mechanism to do that.
Yeah. I guess.
Scrum was covered on Silicon Valley this week, so lots more people know what Scrum is now.
Yeah. All right.
They do in rugby.
Yes.
Yes.
Scrum Master.
All right. MB format v4. Sorry, I haven't been paying as much attention to this because of Py data and message spec stuff. But
That's fine. I just wanted to say that it was ready for looking at.
Yeah.
So, just because I'm excited about it and I want to move forward on it, but I can't do that until people look at it. So.
Yeah. So hopefully, I think my next 2 days are. Are there any more like outstanding questions or things that are unclear?
So I had 2 questions. So the first was, what is supposed to go? So if you scroll down to the bottom, the very last comment. The first is what's supposed to go in kernel info, and then we were having some discussion about the orig and v format metadata key.
Right. Right, and I said something, but it was because I misunderstood what you were talking about. Yeah, I think original, because that's just for big things being up converted or something.
Yeah.
I think putting that in metadata is appropriate. Because I'm not sure that was really. I have to look at documentation of that key in the first place. I think putting it in metadata makes sense.
Okay.
It's possible there is code that we don't want to break that depends on it, but I think that's probably not true.
Okay.
What goes in kernel info? That's kind of something for the kernel spec. That this is. I don't think it. Little things like this, I don't think need to necessarily be all the way final before we merge.
Okay. I just didn't know at all what was supposed to be in it, so.
Yeah. So there's a bit of a question, right? Because you can, at this point, there are three ways to ask, what kernel is this? There's something in the notebook document that tells what kernel it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's the kernel spec, which is files that are really. This is how you start kernels. This is what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also at runtime you can do a kernel info request of the kernel, which is tell me something about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main thing that the main thing that we need in the notebook document is enough information to look up the kernel in the kernel spec list. And then Thomas, do you think
there's a kernel spec name?
Yeah.
Which should definitely be in there because that's how we know which kernel to start. There's I think we should probably represent the language in an abstract way to say.
So that highlighting can.
So that anything that wants to inspect the notebook knows what to deal with. And then I'd probably also say we want to have the code mirror mode. So the kernel spec has a language field and a code mirror mode field which defaults to the language if code mirror mode isn't supplied, and that just tells it how to do the highlighting, and that it can be in the notebook format because if that kernel isn't installed, we can still do the highlighting correctly even without the kernel being there.
So should the kernel info then be an object or a dictionary that has several keys in it, one
I would
for?
think so, yeah.
Can you reference it to another scheme, with a $staff and separate files that would be kernel info?
Specification for the. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that would be necessary, but we could do that.
Yeah, I suspect this will only be maybe 3 or 4 keys.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing we don't want to end up doing, which I think we are kind of at risk of doing, that we want to avoid, is duplicating the entire kernel spec in the notebook format and in the kernel info reply.
Do you have JSON schemas for all the message spec stuff too?
No.
That sounded like a volunteer to me.
I mean,
So that's actually so.
It wouldn't be that hard to do. I mean, like.
No, it shouldn't be difficult. So there is a test. There's a test file called test message spec that implements that kind of test, but it does it with weird traitlets class things that basically I didn't know about the schema stuff. So that would probably be a better way to write those tests. I don't know if it's worth rewriting those tests. It might be. I don't know.
I mean,
But
there's definitely something to be said about like having some of the same schemas shared. Like if it is in fact like should be the same format, then yeah, you would want to duplicate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
yeah, okay. So I think we can have a look over it because once we get this in, then we can start actually writing the NB format implementation.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is a good way to go with the kind of defining what it is, because then that really helps. Because in the earlier notebook formats, we had bugs that we weren't actually doing what we thought we did, but since we were the same code was reading and writing files, nobody noticed there was a bug.
Right.
I think this will really help us do a better job this time around.
Yeah.
And also help us do the translation from 3 to 4.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's the agenda for this week.
Oh, I pushed the thing on when you were talking about it.
Wow.
Scope
The
creep.
terrible thing with these
You changed the size of the container while I was iterating through it. I don't think you're allowed to do that. Oh yeah, kernel spec CLI. I have not looked at that.
So yeah, this is just the main thing is adding a way to install kernel specs so that other kernels can start creating them and installing them. I think it's all. I don't think there's any particular questions that I have about it.
Yeah,
I just wanted to
to just have a look through. Yeah. Filling in the gaps, get that one, and then get the UI and the notebooks. Probably the next step on that stuff. Or is there another step
the
between?
REST API to do before the UI.
Before calling. There. Build the API before calling it. Probably makes sense. Yeah, great. So I've got PRs to review. I need to do that more. Yes, I'll try to look at your PR and Jess's, and someone else can look at mine.
I'm going to look at your PR.
All right.
We have office hours next
All right, yeah.
day.
Yeah, so next Tuesday at 10 Pacific, which is 5-ish GMT.
Yeah.
It's the same time as this.
1700 UTC.
Yeah. Yeah, same time as this in 5 days. IPython office hours. Come, ask
Merry.
questions about stuff.
Oh, we'll have drinks, but that won't help you much on Hangouts.
Yeah.
There is also, I think, Plotly guys that want to hang out in the next few days.
Well, guys? Sure it's not the Beaker guys?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I think.
I know. I had the mail with Plotly guys, and they will also ask for an hangout. So they will arrive.
I think and I think they wanted 10 Eastern, which would be a bit rough for us. But yeah. All right. Anyway, I think that's it for this week.
Yeah. See you. Have fun.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
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 See you on Tuesday or next week.
Yeah.